Namaskar, Jai Shri Krishna. Enlightening text 31, text 32 and text 33 of chapter 15. The Pandavas retire timely of first canto creation of Srimad Bhagavatam. Text 31. Vishoko Brahma Sampatya Samachinna Dvaita Samshayaha Lina Prakruti Nairagunya Dalingatwada Sambhavaha. Because of his possessing spiritual assets, the doubts of duality were completely cut off. Thus he was freed from the three modes of material nature and placed in transcendence. There was no longer any chance of his becoming entangled in birth and death, for he was freed from material form. Doubts of duality begin from the misconception of the material body, which is accepted as the self by less intelligent persons. The most foolish part of our ignorance is our identifying this material body with the self. Everything in relation with the body is ignorantly accepted as our own. Doubts due to misconceptions of myself and mine, in other words, my body, my relatives, my property, my wife, my children, my wealth, my country, my community, and hundreds and thousands of similar illusory contemplations cause bewilderment for the conditioned soul. By assimilating the instructions of the Bhagavad Gita, one is sure to be released from such bewilderment, because real knowledge is knowledge that the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vasudeva, Lord Krishna, is everything, including one's self. Everything is a manifestation of internal potency as part and parcel. The potency and the potent are non-different. So the conception of duality is at once mitigated by attainment of perfect knowledge. As soon as Arjun took up the instructions of the Bhagavad Gita, expert as he was, he could at once eradicate the material conception of Lord Krishna, his eternal friend. He could realize that the Lord was still present before him by his instruction, by his form, by his pastimes, by his qualities, and everything else related to him. He could realize that Lord Krishna, his friend, was still present before him by his transcendental presence in different non-dual energies, and there was no question of attainment of the association of the Lord by another change of body under the influence of time and space. By attainment of absolute knowledge, one can be in association with the Lord constantly, even in this present life, simply by hearing, chanting, thinking of and worshipping the Supreme Lord. One can see Him, one can feel His presence, even in this present life, simply by understanding the Advaya Jnana Lord, or the Absolute Lord, through the process of devotional service which begins with hearing about Him. Lord Chaitanya says that simply by chanting the holy name of the Lord, one can at once wash off the dust on the mirror of pure consciousness, and as soon as the dust is removed, one is freed from all material conditions. To become free from material conditions means to liberate the soul. As soon as one is therefore situated in absolute knowledge, the material conception of life is removed, or he emerges from a false conception of life. Thus, the function of the pure soul is revived in spiritual realization. This practical realization of the living being is made possible due to his becoming free from the reactions of the three modes of material nature, namely goodness, passion and ignorance. By the grace of the Lord, a pure devotee is at once raised to the place of the Absolute, and there is no chance of the devotees becoming materially entangled again in conditioned life. One is not able to feel the presence of the Lord in all circumstances until one is endowed with the required transcendental vision made possible by devotional service prescribed in the revealed scriptures. Arjun had attained this stage long before on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and when he apparently felt the absence of the Lord, he at once took shelter of the instructions of the Bhagavad Gita, and thus again he was placed in his original position. This is the position of Vishok, or the stage of being freed from all grief and anxieties. Text 32. Nishamya Bhagwan Margam Samstham Yadukulasya Cha Swaha Pathaya Matim Chakre Nibhruttatma Yudhishthiraha. Upon hearing of Lord Krishna's returning to his abode, and upon understanding the end of the Yadu dynasty's earthly manifestation, Maharaj Yudhishthira decided to go back home, back to Godhead. Maharaj Yudhishthira also turned his attention to the instructions of the Bhagavad Gita after hearing about the Lord's departure from the vision of earthly people. He began to deliberate on the Lord's way of appearance and disappearance. The mission of the Lord as appearance and disappearance in the mortal universe is completely dependent by his supreme will. He is not forced to appear or disappear by any superior energy as the living beings appear and disappear, being forced by the laws of nature. Whenever the Lord likes, he can appear himself from anywhere and everywhere without disturbing the appearance and disappearance in any other place. He is like the sun. The sun appears and disappears on its own accord at any planet of place without disturbing its presence in other places. The sun appears in the morning in India without disappearing from the western hemisphere. The sun is present everywhere and anywhere all over the solar system, but it so appears that in a particular place the sun appears in the morning and also disappears at some fixed time in the evening. The time limitation even of the sun is of no concern, and so what to speak of the Supreme Lord, who is the creator and controller of the sun. Therefore, in the Bhagavad Gita, it is stated that anyone who factually understands the transcendental appearance and disappearance of the Lord by his inconceivable energy becomes liberated from the laws of birth and death and is placed in the eternal spiritual sky where the Vaikuntha planets are. There such liberated persons can eternally live without the pangs of birth, death, old age and diseases. In the spiritual sky, the Lord and those who are eternally engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord are all eternally young, because there is no old age and disease and there is no death. Because there is no death, there is no birth. It is concluded therefore that simply by understanding the Lord's appearance and disappearance in truth, one can attain the perfectional stage of eternal life. Therefore, Maharaj Yudhishthir also began to consider going back to Godhead. The Lord appears on the earth or any other planet along with his associates who live with him eternally, and the members of the Yadu family who were engaged in supplementing the pastimes of the Lord are no other than his eternal associates, and so also Maharaj Yudhishthir and his brothers and mother, etc. Since the appearance and disappearance of the Lord and his eternal associates are transcendental, one should not be bewildered by the external features of appearance and disappearance. Text 33. Pruthapyanu shrutya dhananjayoditam nasham yadunam bhagavada gatim cha tam ekanta bhaktya bhagavatya dhokshaje niveshi tatmo pararam samasruteha. Kunti, after overhearing Arjun's telling of the end of the Yadu dynasty and disappearance of Lord Krishna, engaged in the devotional service of the transcendental personality of Godhead with full attention and thus gained release from the course of material existence. The setting of the sun does not mean the end of the sun. It means that the sun is out of our sight. Similarly, the end of the mission of the Lord on a particular planet or universe only means that he is out of our sight. The end of the Yadu dynasty also does not mean that it is annihilated. It disappears along with the Lord out of our sight. As Maharaj Yudhishthir decided to prepare to go back to Godhead, so also Kunti decided, and thus she fully engaged herself in the devotional service of the Lord that guarantees one a passport for going back to Godhead after quitting this present material body. The beginning of devotional service to the Lord is the beginning of spiritualizing this present body, and thus an unalloyed devotee of the Lord loses all material contact in the present body. The abode of the Lord is not a myth as is thought by the unbelievers or ignorant people, but one cannot reach there by any material means like a Sputnik or space capsule. But one can certainly reach there after leaving this material body, and one must prepare himself to go back to Godhead by practicing devotional service. That guarantees a passport for going back to Godhead, and Kunti adopted it. Hare Krishna.